I sat at the massive oak dining table on Christmas Eve, watching my father hand over the keys to a $350,000 downtown condo to my sister and her husband. The congregation members and extended family erupted into applause. I just smiled, clapped along, and took a slow sip of my red wine. Nobody at that table realized the deed to that condo belonged exclusively to my company. Within 72 hours, I would sell it for pure cash and disappear, leaving them to face the police. If you have ever smiled through a family betrayal while quietly planning your absolute checkmate, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe because you will want to see exactly how this house of cards collapsed. My name is Maya, and I am 34 years old. I work as an independent wealth manager, a career my parents always dismissed as just doing taxes for people. On this particular Christmas Eve, my parents' house in Atlanta was packed with church elders, choir members, and relatives. My father Marcus is the head pastor of a prominent local megachurch, and my mother Brenda plays the role of First Lady to absolute perfection. Appearance and community standing are the only currencies that matter in their house. The scent of candied yams, collard greens, and roasted turkey filled the air, but my appetite vanished the moment my father tapped his crystal water glass with a silver spoon. The loud chatter of 50 guests died down instantly. My father stood at the head of the table adjusting his tailored suit. His booming preacher voice filled the dining room. Family and friends, we are gathered here tonight to celebrate the birth of our Savior and the blessings of family. He smiled warmly at my younger sister Chloe and her white husband Chad. Chloe was 29, currently pregnant with her second child, and wearing a designer maternity dress that I knew my parents had paid for. Chad sat beside her, looking incredibly smug. As you all know, Chloe and Chad are the future of this family and a shining example to our congregation. My father continued projecting his voice so the church elders in the living room could hear every word. Raising a growing family requires a solid foundation. That is why Brenda and I have decided to give them a truly special Christmas gift this year. We are officially gifting the downtown condo to Chloe and Chad so they can build their legacy. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a shiny set of brass keys, and placed them directly into Chad's hand. The room erupted into cheers. My mother Brenda wiped away a perfectly timed tear, dabbing her cheek with a lace handkerchief. "Praise the Lord," someone shouted from the back. I did not gasp. I did not yell. I simply raised my glass of Cabernet, smiled warmly, and clapped right along with the church elders. The wine tasted exceptionally sweet tonight. My parents had been collecting the rent from that exact condo for the past 5 years. When I originally bought the property under my limited liability company, I allowed my parents to manage the rental income. They claimed they needed the monthly cash flow to supplement their ministry and help fund the church youth programs. Because I suffered from the chronic need to be the strong and dependable daughter, I agreed to let them keep the profits. I paid the property taxes out of my own pocket while they collected the rent checks to maintain their lavish lifestyle. However, I never transferred the deed. Legally, on every city and state document, the property belonged strictly to my business entity. My parents simply assumed that because they had been collecting the rent, they somehow had the authority to give the property away. They were treating a $350,000 piece of real estate like a hand-me-down sweater. Across the table, Chloe squealed and threw her arms around our father. "Thank you so much, Daddy. This is exactly what we need." Chad leaned back in his chair, puffing out his chest. He looked right at me with a condescending smirk. He loved to use forced slang around us, trying desperately to sound like he fit in. "Thanks for moving your old junk out of the basement storage, Maya. It really helped us out, fam. I am bringing in a contractor tomorrow morning. We are knocking down those load-bearing walls to make an open-concept nursery." His arrogance was almost comical, considering he had been unemployed for 2 years, claiming to be a cryptocurrency investor, while my parents secretly paid his credit card bills. The sheer audacity of him standing there wearing a designer watch, bought with my parents' money, and bragging about destroying walls in a building he did not own was breathtaking. I met his gaze across the centerpiece of roasted vegetables. I kept my posture relaxed, resting my elbows on the table. You are very welcome, Chad, I replied, keeping my voice entirely devoid of sarcasm. That storage space was getting dusty anyway. Good luck with the demolition tomorrow. Make sure you wear a hard hat. He laughed loudly, oblivious to the trap snapping shut beneath his feet. Under the cover of the long white tablecloth, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed brightly in the dim light. I opened my email and found the pending message from a corporate real estate buyer who specialized in rapid cash acquisitions. They had offered $330,000 for a quick 3-day closing. I typed a single sentence. I accept the cash offer and guarantee the property will be entirely vacant by New Year's Eve. I pressed send, securing my revenge in absolute silence as my family happily celebrated their stolen gift. This was just the beginning of their perfect nightmare. The noise of the dining room faded slightly as I carried my empty wine glass into the kitchen. I needed a moment away from the suffocating cheers and my mother's performative tears. I set the crystal glass on the granite counter and gripped the smooth stone edge, taking a deep breath of the cinnamon-scented air. Before I could even pour myself a glass of water, the heavy swinging door pushed open. Chad strolled into the kitchen with his hands tucked into the pockets of his expensive slacks. He had a toothpick hanging out of the corner of his mouth and that signature look of unearned confidence plastered across his face. He leaned against the refrigerator, crossing his ankles, and looked me up and down. "You know, Maya, we were thinking about you tonight," he said, using that fake sympathetic tone he usually reserved for people he deemed beneath him. "Chloe and I were talking and we realize it must be tough for you, being the older sister and watching us build a real family while you are still playing the single life. It is not a good look for a woman your age, fam." I slowly turned around to face him. Did he really just call me fam? The forced slang sounded absolutely ridiculous coming from a man who grew up in a gated community in Connecticut and spent his days playing golf. I kept my face perfectly neutral, waiting for him to finish his thought. "We want to help you out." Chad continued, pulling the shiny new brass keys from his pocket and tossing them into the air. He caught them with a loud jingle. "Since we are taking over the condo tomorrow, we are going to have a lot of extra space. The basement down there is fully finished. It has its own little entrance and everything. We figured we could rent it out to you. Give you a nice family discount too. That way you are not so lonely and single all the time. You could be close to the new baby and help Chloe out around the house. It is a win for everyone." I stared at him, letting his sheer audacity wash over me. He was standing in my parents' house offering to rent my own property back to me so I could serve as a live-in nanny for his wife. "That is quite the generous offer, Chad," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He mistook my restraint for submission. "Well, Marcus and Brenda know I am the man of the house now," he bragged, puffing out his chest again. "They know Chloe needs a real provider to secure her future. No offense, Maya, but you just sit at a desk doing taxes for people all day. That is not building generational wealth. Real estate is how you build an empire. I know you do not understand how these big financial assets work, but do not worry. I will take good care of the place." I smiled, keeping my hands resting casually on the counter. My mind instantly flashed back to a very different version of Chad from 3 years ago. I remembered him sitting at this exact kitchen island, crying into his hands because his brilliant cryptocurrency investments had completely tanked. He had gambled away his entire wedding budget 2 months before he was supposed to walk down the aisle. I remembered my sister calling me in hysterics, begging for a bailout so she would not be humiliated in front of her friends. I had quietly transferred $40,000 from my business account to pay for their venue, their flowers, and the very designer suit Chad was currently wearing. I saved him from absolute ruin, and he had never once muttered the word thank you. Instead, he stood here today, lecturing me about building an empire while holding the keys to a condo I bought with my own money. "You are right, Chad," I said, taking a step toward him. "I probably do not understand how big financial assets work as well as you do. Doing taxes all day really limits my perspective." He nodded eagerly, missing the heavy irony in my words completely. "Exactly. But look, we are family. If you need me to look over your little business portfolio sometime, I can give you some pointers. I have been reading up on some aggressive market strategies. You need a masculine energy managing your money, Maya. Women get too emotional with their investments. That is why your dad gave the condo to me. He knows I have the vision to turn that place into a gold mine. I watched him toss the keys in the air one more time. The metal clinked sharply as he caught them. He looked so incredibly proud of himself standing there bragging about stealing my property. It took every ounce of my professional self-control not to laugh right in his face. Instead, I let a warm, genuine smile spread across my lips. I was not angry anymore. I was simply anticipating the magnificent crash that was coming his way. "Enjoy the renovations, Chad," I said softly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened the secure portal for the corporate real estate buyer. My previous email had initiated the process, but now I needed to finalize the legally binding transfer. The digital contract was waiting for my signature. The terms were clear: $330,000 wired directly to my offshore trust account, a completely as-is purchase with a 3-day closing window, and most importantly, immediate possession by the buyer upon completion. The corporate firm Vanguard Holdings was notorious for using aggressive private security to clear out squatters the second the ink dried. I tapped the screen, typing out my full legal name to electronically sign the document. I hit send. The confirmation screen flashed green. The wheels were officially in motion and nothing could stop them now. The kitchen door swung open just as I dropped my phone back into my purse. My mother marched inside. Her emerald suit was pristine, her signature diamond cross resting perfectly against her collarbone. Brenda possessed a radar for anything that threatened her curated reality, and apparently my silence had triggered it. The ambient noise of the Christmas party vanished, leaving just the hum of the refrigerator. She crossed her arms and stared at me with the practiced gaze of a woman who commanded respect from thousands of parishioners every Sunday. "You have been awfully quiet, Maya. You did not stand up when your father made the announcement. You just sat there sipping your drink. The church elders notice these things." I met her gaze evenly, feeling the phantom weight of the digital contract I had just signed. I clapped Mom. I smiled. I did not want to steal Chloe's spotlight. My mother sighed a sharp, exasperated sound. "Do not play games with me. I know you are harboring some resentment about the condo. You always get so possessive about money." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the cinnamon-scented air. Possessive. I was the one who handed over $40,000 to save Chad from public humiliation. I was the one who paid for their lavish anniversary gala when church donations fell short. I was the one who bought that exact condo 5 years ago, putting down $80,000 of my own savings, while they claimed it was a joint family investment simply because they collected the tenant rent. Now she was accusing me of being greedy for quietly existing, while they literally gave away $350,000 of my assets. It was just a placeholder arrangement anyway. Brenda continued, waving her hand dismissively as if erasing the legal deed registered with the county clerk. "We all knew that property was meant to support the family ministry. Your father and I have prayed on this heavily. Chloe and Chad need a proper start. We cannot have the congregation whispering about why the pastor's daughter is raising her second baby in a cramped rental while her older sister hoards a luxury downtown property." I watched her rewrite history right in front of me. She truly believed her own fabricated narrative. In her mind, my financial success was merely a communal resource designed to prop up the family's image. Brenda stepped closer, lowering her voice into a tone that was equal parts honey and venom. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to sign the official title transfer over to Chad before the end of the year. I need this handled quietly and cleanly. No lawyers, no delays." I kept my face completely blank. "You want me to sign the deed over to Chad?" "Yes." "Maya," Brenda said, her eyes narrowing as she searched my face for any sign of defiance. "And I do not want to hear any complaining about it. You are a strong Black woman, Maya. You are independent. You have your business. You can easily buy yourself another house whenever you please. Chloe is different. She chose the traditional path. She chose family. And Chad needs this win. He needs to feel like the man of the house, like a real provider. His ego simply cannot handle knowing his single sister-in-law owns the roof over his family's head. I stood there letting the familiar toxic trope wash over me. The strong black woman. It was the weapon they always used to chain me to their endless demands. My independence was penalized. Because I was capable, I was expected to sacrifice. Without a husband to hide behind, my resources were considered up for grabs. I was supposed to carry the fragile ego of a mediocre man simply because it looked better on their Christmas card. My mother grabbed my hands, squeezing them tight. I felt the sharp edges of her rings pressing into my skin. "Promise me, Maya. Promise me you will get this placeholder paperwork finalized. We have the big New Year's Eve watch night service next week. The community will be there. I want to start the new year with a clean slate, with our family united and prosperous." I looked into my mother's eyes, seeing the desperate need for absolute control, masking itself as maternal guidance. She had no idea that her perfect kingdom was built on sand, and the tide was already rushing in. The corporate buyer had guaranteed a 3-day closing. By December 31st, the property would legally belong to a faceless multi-billion-dollar holding company. And that holding company did not care about the pastor's family image, Chad's fragile ego, or Chloe's traditional path. They cared about securing their investment, and their private security teams were legendary for removing unauthorized occupants immediately. I slowly pulled my hands out of her grasp and gave her the exact smile she wanted to see, a soft, compliant, obedient smile. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "The new year requires a clean slate. I understand exactly what needs to happen. I will bring all the final paperwork to the New Year's Eve watch night service. We can take care of it right then and there." Brenda let out a massive sigh of relief, her rigid posture finally relaxing. She pulled me into a tight, suffocating hug, her expensive perfume filling my lungs. "Thank you, Maya," she whispered into my ear. "I knew you would do the right thing for your family. You always do." I slowly wrapped my arms around her, patting her back gently. I stared over her shoulder at the shiny stainless steel refrigerator, my heart beating with a calm, methodical rhythm. I would bring the paperwork exactly as promised. But Brenda was completely unaware that the documents I would be handing over at the stroke of midnight were not a deed transfer. They were legally binding corporate eviction notices. Christmas morning arrived with the relentless buzzing of my phone vibrating against my nightstand. I reached out from beneath my warm duvet and grabbed the device, squinting at the bright screen. It was barely 7 in the morning, but the family group chat was already exploding. Chloe was flooding the thread with high-resolution photos of her new reality. A massive delivery truck was parked aggressively across the driveway of my downtown condo, its back doors flung wide open to reveal thousands of dollars worth of custom furniture. There was a velvet sectional sofa, a distressed oak dining table, and a handcrafted crib that probably cost more than my first car. Every single piece was clearly bought on credit, fueled by the false security of their free luxury housing. Chad followed the photos with a barrage of demanding text messages. He typed in all capital letters, ordering me to get out of bed and come over immediately to help them carry the heavy boxes inside. He specifically noted that his back was acting up from his supposed gym workout, and since Chloe was pregnant, the heavy lifting fell to me. My mother chimed in right on cue. She sent a voice note reminding me that Christmas is about service and sacrifice, instructing me to put on some sweatpants and head downtown to bless my sister. I listened to her voice note twice, letting the sheer entitlement wash over me. I did not type a reply. I did not send a thumbs-up emoji. I simply set the phone face down on my mattress, pushed back the covers, and walked into my kitchen to brew a strong pot of dark roast coffee. While they were busy obsessing over velvet sofas and brass light fixtures, I had real work to do. I carried my steaming mug to my home office and booted up my laptop. The morning sun streamed through the blinds as I logged directly into my secure banking portal. For years, I had maintained a joint savings account with my parents, originally established when I was in college. Over time, it had become a convenient slush fund for their constant church emergencies and lifestyle upgrades. I clicked the Settings tab and permanently removed my name and funds from the account, transferring my entire balance into a private, restricted trust. Next, I opened my life insurance policy. When I started my wealth management firm, I took out a substantial multi-million-dollar policy to protect my assets. At the time, fueled by misplaced guilt and a desperate desire for their approval, I listed Marcus and Brenda as the primary beneficiaries. I navigated to the beneficiary designation page. With 3 steady clicks, I deleted their names entirely. In their place, I designated a charity supporting financially abused women. The finality of the action felt like a heavy iron chain snapping right off my shoulders. I was systematically dismantling the financial safety net they had taken for granted for over a decade. I reviewed my estate planning documents, revoking any medical or financial power of attorney my parents previously held. I was legally severing myself from their toxic grip, ensuring that my wealth, my business, and my future were protected from their endless demands. My phone vibrated again, rattling against the wooden desk. The group chat was escalating. Chloe sent a picture of a massive pile of cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly on the frosty driveway, covered only by thin plastic tarps. She was complaining that the delivery drivers refused to bring the items inside because the smart lock passcodes I had set for the condo were not working. Chad sent a furious text demanding the master override code immediately, threatening to break a window if I did not comply. My mother added another message calling me petty and spiteful for delaying their move-in process on Christmas Day of all days. The truth was, I had remotely deactivated every single access code to the property at midnight. The smart home system was now entirely locked down, controlled exclusively by the new corporate buyer security protocol. Chad and Chloe were standing outside a fortress they could not enter, staring at thousands of dollars of furniture they could not afford, shivering in the December chill. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. I opened the group chat and finally typed a response. I kept it brief, professional, and entirely unhelpful. I told them the smart home system was undergoing a mandatory software update and the locks would remain unresponsive until the process was complete. I added that I was currently out of town dealing with a client emergency and could not come down to help them move furniture. I wished them a Merry Christmas and promptly muted the entire conversation. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair and watched the snow begin to fall outside my window. The peaceful silence of my apartment was a stark contrast to the frantic chaos I knew was unfolding on that driveway. They were experiencing a tiny fraction of the stress they had inflicted on me for my entire life. As I sat there enjoying the quiet, a new email notification popped up on my computer screen. The sender was Vanguard Holdings, the corporate real estate firm purchasing the condo. The subject line was marked urgent, and the message was concise. The escrow account had been fully funded with the $330,000 in pure cash. The title transfer was processing smoothly through the automated county system. But it was the final sentence that made a genuine, unforced smile break across my face. The Vanguard agent confirmed that their private inspection team was scheduled to arrive at the property for the final walkthrough tomorrow morning at exactly 9. Tomorrow was Sunday. At that exact time, my entire family would be trapped inside my father's church, completely unable to check their phones. This was an absolute checkmate for them. The cold Sunday morning dawned with a brittle frost. I arrived at the megachurch 15 minutes after the service began, slipping through the heavy oak doors. Bypassing the reserved family section at the front, I took a seat in the very last pew. The usher, a man who had known me since I was in middle school, nodded. I had a perfect view of the massive elevated stage where my father paced back and forth, a microphone clipped to his lapel. Down in the front row, Chloe was holding court. She wore a custom maternity dress in a striking shade of sapphire blue. Members of the congregation were leaning over the pews, handing her boxes and envelopes. These were housewarming gifts funded by the money of parishioners who had been convinced that blessing Chloe and Chad was equivalent to blessing the church itself. Chloe patted her stomach, laughing loudly, soaking in the adoration. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her perfect Sunday morning was about to shatter. My father raised his hands, signaling the choir to fade out. He gripped the podium and lowered his voice into a deep, resonant register. Family is not just about blood, he boomed. Family is about sacrifice. It is about the older generation laying down their pride and possessions to pave a golden road for the younger generation. He stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto mine in the back row. Selfishness is the ultimate sin, he continued. When we hoard our blessings, when we refuse to step aside and provide for the new life entering our family, we are failing our purpose. We must surrender our individual greed to build an empire for our children. The congregation erupted into a chorus of applause. I did not flinch. Under the cover of the hymnal, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking application. The notification I had been waiting for all morning was glowing at the top of the screen. The Vanguard Holdings wire transfer had cleared escrow. $330,000 in cash was currently sitting in my primary checking account. The sheer reality of the numbers made my pulse quicken. I tapped the transfer icon. I had already set up an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands, a legal fortress designed to be untouchable by any domestic civil suits or familial claims. I typed in the full amount, leaving exactly $0.00 behind. The screen prompted me for my two-factor authentication code. I typed the 6 digits without hesitation. The loading wheel spun before the green confirmation checkmark appeared. The money was gone, vaporized from the American banking system, locked away in a vault where my parents could never reach it. I leaned back against the pew. My father was still preaching. He paced from one side of the stage to the other, gesturing toward Chad, who was sitting next to Chloe with his chest puffed out. Chad nodded along to every word my father said, occasionally turning to accept a congratulatory pat on the shoulder from the church elders sitting behind him. They were all celebrating a victory that had already been snatched right out from under them. At that exact moment, across town in the downtown district, a team of private inspectors from Vanguard Holdings was walking through the empty rooms of my former condo. I knew the timeline perfectly. They were verifying the square footage, checking the HVAC system, and confirming that the property was completely devoid of any unauthorized occupants or belongings. Since Chad and Chloe had been unable to move their credit card-funded furniture inside yesterday, the condo remained a pristine vacant shell, exactly as Vanguard required. The inspectors would sign off. The corporate lawyers would file the final deed transfer with the county electronically, and the new locks would be permanently coded to the holding company. My phone buzzed sharply against my thigh, breaking my train of thought. I glanced down. It was a text message from Chad. He was sitting less than 50 feet away from me in the front row, pretending to listen to the sermon while secretly messaging me under his Bible. I opened the message. The tone was frantic and aggressive. "Why is the condo HOA portal locking me out?" he wrote. "I tried to log in to register my contractor for the wall demolition tomorrow, and the system says my access is permanently denied. The delivery guys dumped the boxes on the driveway, and I cannot even get the garage to open. Fix it right now. We have painters coming at 8 in the morning." He genuinely believed I was his personal technical support. He thought a simple glitch was standing between him and his stolen empire. He had no idea that the HOA portal had locked him out because the system had automatically updated the owner registry the moment the wire transfer cleared. Legally, the name Chad did not exist anywhere in that building database. I watched him from the back of the church. He was glaring at his phone screen, his leg bouncing with irritated, nervous energy. Chloe reached over and touched his arm, annoyed that he was distracted while her father was preaching. Chad shook her hand off his thumb, hovering over his screen as he waited for my response. I took my time. I let him sweat for 5 minutes while the choir returned to sing the closing hymn. The voices filled the sanctuary, masking the sound of my fingers tapping against the glass screen. I crafted my response with detached precision. "System update," I typed, watching the text bubble appear on my screen. "Should be clear by New Year's Eve." I hit send, slipped the phone into my purse, and stood up to join the congregation in the final prayer, smiling as I watched Chad stare at his screen in helpless frustration. I slipped out the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary before the final amens even faded into the vaulted ceiling. The cold Sunday air hit my face, a sharp and welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of the crowded megachurch. I walked to my car, leaving my father pacing the stage and Chad frantically refreshing his locked application. The drive to my parents' house took less than 20 minutes. The suburban streets were perfectly quiet, swept clean of winter frost, lined with pristine brick houses that hid 1,000 ugly secrets. My parents' estate was the largest on the block, a sprawling colonial property with towering white pillars that always felt more like a museum than an actual home. I pulled my car into the empty circular driveway. They would be at the church for at least another 3 hours, shaking hands in the lobby, accepting envelopes of cash for Chloe, and bathing in the endless adoration of their congregation. I unlocked the heavy front door and stepped inside. The air smelled of lemon wood polish and expensive vanilla candles. I walked through the grand foyer, my heels clicking loudly against the marble floor. I paused to glance at the massive gallery wall of framed family portraits. There was Chloe in her designer wedding dress, Chloe and Chad holding their first baby, my parents posing smiling with the local mayor. I was only visible in one small, slightly out of focus photograph near the bottom corner, standing awkwardly apart from the rest of them. I climbed the sweeping curved staircase to my old bedroom to pack the very last pieces of my childhood. I only brought a single canvas tote bag with me. There was not much left in that pristine, perfectly staged room that truly belonged to me. I grabbed my grandmother's silver locket from the back of the jewelry box, a stack of old journals I had kept hidden beneath the floorboards, and a framed photograph of myself from my college graduation. My parents had never bothered to display it downstairs with the others. I zipped the tote bag closed, taking one last look at the emotionally barren room. I would never sleep under this roof again. On my way back down the long carpeted hallway, I paused outside my father's study. The heavy mahogany door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was a monument to his towering ego. Wall-to-wall bookshelves were filled with thick theological commentaries he never actually read. Two leather wingback chairs sat facing a massive oak desk, positioned perfectly in the center of the room to intimidate his guests. I walked over to the desk, intending to leave my house key right in the center of his expensive leather blotter. It was meant to be a silent final resignation from their lives. As I placed the brass key down, a thick stack of mail caught my eye. My father was incredibly careless with his financial paperwork, operating under the arrogant assumption that no one would ever dare question the great Pastor Marcus. A letter bearing the logo of a prominent commercial lender sat near the top of the pile. It was marked urgent with a final notice stamp printed in bold red ink. I normally would have ignored it, but the address printed just below the plastic window was not my parents' residential address. It was the address of my downtown condo. I pulled the envelope from the stack. It had already been sliced open with a silver letter opener. I slid the thick packet of paper out and unfolded it flat on the desk. It was a statement for a commercial line of credit. The outstanding balance was exactly $50,000. The primary borrowers listed were Marcus and Brenda, but the collateral securing the massive loan was the legal deed to my property. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped to the second page of the packet. Attached was a scanned copy of the original loan authorization from exactly 2 years ago. There, resting on the bottom signature line, was my name. It was an absolute forgery. The cursive loops were far too wide, the slant was entirely wrong, and the ink was accompanied by a fake notary stamp from a woman who happened to be a devoted member of my father's church choir. They had faked a board resolution for my limited liability company, claiming they had the legal authority to leverage my property for cash. I stared at the date printed on the fraudulent document. October. The exact same month my parents hosted the church's extravagant 25th anniversary gala. I vividly remembered that night, the grand ballroom they rented at the downtown convention center, the towering ice sculptures carved into the shape of angels, the 5-course catered meal featuring imported Wagyu beef, the custom-tailored velvet tuxedo my father wore. When the church board had gently questioned the exorbitant cost of the party, my father proudly claimed that an anonymous, deeply blessed donor had covered the entire event. There was no anonymous donor. They had stolen $50,000 of equity right out of my condo to fund their vanity project. They had been secretly paying the minimum monthly interest out of the rent money they collected from my tenants. No wonder Brenda was so desperate for me to transfer the deed to Chad before the end of the year. The loan term was likely maturing, or the balloon payment was finally coming due. If they officially gave the condo to Chad, they could manipulate him into refinancing the property, quietly burying their $50,000 fraud inside his new mortgage. They thought they had engineered the perfect untraceable crime. They were completely unaware of how ruthless commercial real estate escrow actually worked. Vanguard Holdings was paying in pure cash. By tomorrow morning, the corporate title company would run a comprehensive background search on the property to ensure a clean transfer. They would immediately flag the $50,000 lien. Vanguard's aggressive lawyers would demand the lien be satisfied before the closing could proceed. The title company would contact the commercial lender, and the lender would be forced to verify the payoff directly with the limited liability company's legal owner, me. The moment I contested the validity of that lien and presented my authentic corporate documents to the title company, the bank would instantly realize they held a fraudulent loan. They would immediately accelerate the debt, demanding the full $50,000 from Marcus and Brenda in cash. If my parents could not produce the money, within days the bank would launch a full criminal fraud investigation. I carefully folded the bank statement and the forged signature page. I did not leave them on the desk. I smiled, feeling a cool, sharp sense of absolute victory as I slipped the damning documents directly into my canvas tote bag. My father loved to preach about generational wealth and family sacrifice. Now he was going to learn a very hard lesson about federal bank fraud. I zipped the canvas tote bag shut, the heavy brass zipper gliding smoothly over the stolen bank documents tucked safely inside. Slipping the straps over my shoulder, I walked out of my father's study and pulled the mahogany door closed until it clicked shut. The grand foyer below was just as silent and sterile as I had left it. I marched down the curved staircase, my boots striking the marble tiles with a steady, rhythmic cadence. I reached the massive double front doors, grasped the iron handle, and stepped out into the biting December cold. My breath formed white clouds in the freezing air as I descended the brick steps toward my car. A sudden roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet suburban street. A black luxury SUV swerved sharply around the corner, its tires crunching aggressively over the frost-covered gravel as it sped up the circular driveway. The vehicle jerked to a violent halt directly behind my sedan, deliberately blocking me in. The driver's side door flew open before the engine even cut out. Chad stepped onto the driveway, his face flushed a mottled, furious red. He had clearly walked out of the Sunday service early, abandoning his front row seat and my father's sermon the moment he realized my text message was not a joke. He slammed his car door with enough force to rattle the windows of the house. He stormed across the driveway, closing the distance between us in heavy, stomping strides. I stopped at the base of the brick steps, planting my feet firmly on the frozen concrete. I did not retreat. I did not drop my gaze. I stood perfectly still as he marched right up into my personal space, stopping less than a foot away. He was a large man built thick from hours in the gym, and he routinely used his physical size to intimidate people into compliance. He glared down at me, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched tight. "Give me the master passcodes right now," he demanded, his voice a low, hostile growl. "I am not playing games with you today. My contractors are sitting in their trucks freezing their asses off. I have a demolition crew scheduled to knock down the kitchen wall tomorrow morning, and I cannot even get past the front gate. You need to unlock that smart home portal immediately." I looked at him, letting a few seconds of absolute silence stretch between us. The sheer audacity of his entitlement was almost fascinating to witness. He was demanding access to a property he did not own, to renovate a kitchen he did not pay for, using money his pregnant wife had likely begged out of my parents. "You are blocking my car, Chad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of emotion. "Move your vehicle." He stepped closer, his shadow falling completely over me. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face. "You listened to me very carefully," he sneered. "Marcus and Brenda already gave us that condo. They promised it to Chloe for the baby. That makes me the new homeowner. I have legal rights. I am not going to stand out on the street like a trespasser because you are throwing a petty temper tantrum over a velvet sofa. Unlock the doors, hand over the master override codes, and get out of my way before I call a locksmith to drill out every single deadbolt on that property. I felt a cold razor-sharp smile pull at the corners of my mouth. He was so breathtakingly arrogant, so completely insulated by my parents' endless financial enabling, that he actually believed his own delusions of grandeur. He thought invoking his status as the man of the house would force me into submission. "You do not have any legal rights to anything," I replied, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You do not own that condo. You do not own the ground you are standing on right now. You are a 32-year-old man who still relies on his father-in-law to pay his credit card bills." Chad flinched, his eyes narrowing, but I did not give him a chance to interrupt. I stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between us, forcing him to either hold his ground or step back. He shifted his weight, a subtle sign of retreat. "Do not ever try to intimidate me," I continued, my words cutting through the freezing air like glass. "You want to talk about your rights as a homeowner? Let us talk about your track record. How is that crypto startup doing? The one my father sank $80,000 into before it quietly filed for bankruptcy last spring. What about the boutique fitness franchise you were supposed to open downtown? The one that never made it past the initial commercial lease because you forgot to secure the proper zoning permits? Or your premium nutritional supplement line that currently occupies half of my parents' basement because you could not secure a single retail distribution deal? You are a professional failure, Chad. You jump from one disastrous vanity project to the next, burning through my family's money, and now you think you are entitled to $1 million piece of real estate just because you managed to get my sister pregnant." His face drained of color, the angry red flushing away to a sickly pale white. His jaw worked silently as he searched for a comeback, but the brutal, unfiltered truth had completely short-circuited his bluster. No one in the family ever mentioned his failures aloud. My parents constantly smoothed over his financial disasters, rebranding them as learning experiences to protect Chloe's fragile feelings. Hearing his entire history of incompetence laid out with such surgical precision left him totally defenseless. "The smart home portal is undergoing a mandatory system-wide security update," I said, maintaining my relentless eye contact. "The external locks are completely frozen until the software patch finalizes. There is absolutely nothing I can do to override the protocol from my phone. The passcodes will be fully active by December 31st. Tell your demolition crew to go home." He stared at me, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He wanted to scream, he wanted to break something, but he knew he was completely outmatched. The absolute certainty in my voice convinced him that the security lockout was a technical reality he could not bully his way through. "You are a bitter, miserable person," he spat, taking a step back toward his SUV. "Marcus is going to hear about this. You are going to regret pulling this garbage today of all days." I watched in silence as he spun around, marched back to his oversized vehicle, and threw himself into the driver's seat. He slammed the door, threw the transmission into reverse, and hit the gas. The SUV tore backward down the driveway, the tires spinning and throwing loose gravel across the frozen lawn. He whipped the steering wheel hard, overcorrecting as he backed into the street before shifting into drive and speeding away toward the church. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the winter air. The confrontation had not rattled me. It had energized me. I walked to my sedan, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I tossed the canvas tote bag onto the passenger seat, the forged bank documents resting safely inside. I pressed the push-to-start button. The engine hummed to life, and the dashboard screen illuminated. Before I could even shift the car into gear, the Bluetooth system chimed loudly through the cabin speakers. An incoming call alert flashed across the digital display. The caller ID showed the name of my corporate real estate attorney. I reached out and tapped the answer button on the steering wheel. "Maya, we are completely finished," my lawyer said, his voice crisp, professional, and radiating success. "The wire transfer has been fully verified, and escrow is officially closed. The title company pushed the paperwork through the county electronic registry 10 minutes ago." The title transfer is complete. The corporate buyer officially owns the property as of 2 p.m. today. I ended the call with the simple word of thanks and dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. The property was no longer mine. The liability was gone. Chad and Chloe were currently trespassing on prime real estate owned by a faceless, aggressive corporate holding company. I shifted the sedan into drive and steered out of the neighborhood, leaving the manicured lawns and the suffocating expectations of my childhood entirely in the rearview mirror. I spent the next few days in a state of meticulous preparation. I smiled. I packed my belongings into 2 hard-shell suitcases, leaving nothing behind but empty hangars and the lingering echoes of a family that had never truly wanted me. My brand new life was finally beginning today. The morning of December 30th arrived with a bitter, biting chill. The temperature had plummeted overnight, threatening an early winter storm. I was sitting at a quiet corner table in a local cafe, sipping a dark roast coffee, when my phone screen illuminated with a rapid succession of notifications. The family group chat, which I had kept unmuted, purely for the entertainment value of their escalating panic, was exploding. Chloe was sending paragraph after paragraph of frantic complaints. The digital smart locks on the condo were completely offline. The keypads were dead, the biometric scanners were unresponsive, and the mobile application simply displayed a fatal server error. She attached a series of high-resolution photos to the thread to emphasize her misery. The pictures showed the expansive front porch of the condo completely buried under a mountain of expensive custom furniture. The velvet sectional sofa, the handcrafted nursery crib, and the distressed oak dining table were haphazardly shoved together, covered only by thin, flapping blue plastic tarps. The wind was whipping the plastic around, exposing the delicate fabrics and expensive wood finishes to the freezing, damp air. Chloe typed in all capital letters, furious that the delivery drivers had refused to wait around any longer and had simply abandoned the thousands of dollars of unpaid merchandise outside in the elements. She sent a video clip of Chad kicking a heavy cardboard box, screaming at a customer service representative on speakerphone. She demanded to know why my system update was taking so long, complaining that the damp weather was going to permanently warp the crib she had specifically ordered from Italy. My mother immediately joined the digital fray. Brenda fired off a scathing voice note, her tone dripping with righteous indignation. She scolded me for being spiteful and intentionally slow with the tech handover. She accused me of trying to ruin Chloe's nesting experience out of pure jealousy. Brenda typed out a message demanding that I drive down to the property, instantly bypass the system with a physical master key, and manually carry the heavy furniture inside so her pregnant daughter would not have to stress. She reminded me yet again that family serves family. As I sat reading their demands, I thought about the forged bank statements safely tucked away in my bag. They were demanding I act as a manual laborer for a house they had fraudulently leveraged. The $50,000 commercial line of credit my parents had secretly extracted against my condo to fund their lavish church gala was about to detonate. The bank would receive the payoff demand from Vanguard's title company by tomorrow morning. When the bank realized the loan was fraudulent, they would accelerate the debt. My parents were going to need $50,000 in cash immediately or face federal charges. And they were currently yelling at me over text about a velvet sofa. I watched the messages cascade down the screen. I did not offer explanations about corporate acquisitions. I did not mention the private security protocols Vanguard Holdings had initiated to secure their asset. I simply tapped the screen and replied to Brenda's demanding, insulting tirade with a single generic thumbs-up emoji. The utter silence that followed in the chat was deafening. They were so accustomed to my immediate compliance, so used to me bending over backward to appease their manufactured crises, that my blatant passive-aggressive dismissal completely short-circuited their usual tactics. I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket, leaving the cafe with a bright, unforced smile. 2 hours later, the chaotic reality of my family's self-inflicted disaster felt a million miles away. The automatic glass doors of the international terminal parted silently as I stepped into the climate-controlled comfort of the airport. The atmosphere was a stark, beautiful contrast, to the freezing driveway where my sister was currently having a meltdown over damp velvet. I navigated the bustling concourse with practiced ease, rolling my luggage toward the exclusive priority check-in counter. A polite uniformed attendant greeted me with a warm smile, bypassing the winding lines of stressed holiday travelers. I handed over my passport and my confirmed itinerary to the first-class lounge attendant. She typed rapidly on her keyboard, printing my boarding pass and handing it back with a polished ivory card. I thanked her and made my way through the expedited security checkpoint, stepping into the hushed, luxurious sanctuary of the lounge. The air smelled of fresh espresso and expensive leather. I found a secluded plush armchair overlooking the massive tarmac and ordered a glass of vintage champagne. I checked my watch. My flight to the Maldives was scheduled to depart in exactly 2 hours. By the time the heavy demolition crew Chad had hired arrived at the condo tomorrow morning to tear down the kitchen wall, I would be halfway across the globe. They were going to walk right into a fortress owned by a corporate holding company armed with sledgehammers. Vanguard Holdings did not negotiate with trespassers. I smiled as the departure screen flashed my terminal number. I took a slow sip of the crisp champagne, savoring the absolute peace of my escape, knowing the real storm was about to hit them with catastrophic force. Chad was losing patience. He shivered on the pavement, glaring at the impenetrable door. Plastic tarps covering the luxury furniture flapped in the freezing wind. Chloe sat inside his SUV, angrily texting. She knocked sharply on the glass, mouthing at him to do something. Chad pulled his collar up, his pride stinging. He had promised his wife a seamless transition into their free life. He had assured Marcus he was capable of handling logistics. He was not about to let a stubborn deadbolt ruin his image. He dialed an emergency locksmith with a guaranteed rapid response. When a white work van pulled into the driveway, Chad marched forward. The locksmith, an older man in a canvas jacket, stepped out and surveyed the scene. He eyed the stacked furniture, the furious woman glaring from the SUV, and the high-end digital lock securing the entrance. The technician frowned, setting his toolbox down. He asked to see a lease agreement to verify residency before bypassing a commercial-grade security system. Chad scoffed, rolling his eyes at the suggestion that he needed to prove his authority. He puffed out his chest, exuding the unearned arrogance he had perfected over years of living off my parents' wealth. "I own this place," Chad stated, his voice dripping with condescension. "My sister-in-law is just being a bitter spinster who forgot to transfer the master digital override codes. She has always been jealous of my wife, and she is trying to delay our move out of pure spite. I am not waiting out here in the freezing cold for her to stop throwing a temper tantrum. Just drill the damn lock out. I will pay double your emergency rate in cash if you get this door open now." The locksmith hesitated, looking from Chad's posture to the keypad. The lock was a sleek biometric model integrated into a heavy steel core. It was not a residential deadbolt, it was a corporate-grade security device. But the promise of double cash on a holiday weekend was enough to override professional caution. He nodded, pulling a power drill and titanium bits from his metal case. Chad crossed his arms with a triumphant smirk. He watched as the technician positioned the drill bit against the center of the casing. The high-pitched whine of the drill split the quiet air, grinding against the reinforced metal. Metal shavings curled and sparked, falling onto the frosted mat. Inside the SUV, Chloe smiled, pulling out her phone to record a video of her husband taking charge. She was planning her social media caption about overcoming obstacles and claiming her rightful blessings. Neither of them had any idea what was happening beneath the exterior of that lock. When Vanguard Holdings finalized the wire transfer at 2 o'clock, their asset protection protocols went live. The condo was no longer classified as a private residential dwelling. It was categorized as high-value corporate property, monitored by a centralized security network designed to protect vacant real estate assets from unauthorized entry. The digital lock was not just a mechanism to keep doors shut. It was a networked sensor wired directly into an emergency dispatch center. The titanium drill bit chewed through the outer casing and hit the internal electronic motherboard. The moment the drill severed the primary circuit, the lock did not simply fail. It triggered a catastrophic breach protocol. A silent encrypted distress signal shot from the integrated network hub, hidden inside the utility closet, beaming directly to Vanguard's contracted private security firm. Chad watched the locksmith lean into the drill, oblivious to the invisible alarm screaming across the city. The technician grunted, pushing harder as the cylinder finally shattered. He pulled the drill back, wiping sweat from his forehead, and reached for a heavy screwdriver to pry the mechanism apart. Chad stepped forward, eager to push the heavy oak door open and claim his prize. He was visualizing where the velvet sofa would sit in the expansive living room. 2 miles away, inside a windowless dispatch center, a red indicator light flashed violently across a digital map of the downtown district. A dispatcher verified the address, confirming the property was registered as a vacant corporate asset. The classification code required an immediate high-level response. The dispatcher slammed a button on his console, opening a direct radio channel to a roving tactical unit stationed less than 5 minutes away. The radio crackled to life inside an unmarked security cruiser, idling in a commercial parking lot. A team of 3 armed private security contractors dressed in tactical gear and Kevlar vests received the dispatch coordinates. The driver activated the flashing amber strobe lights hidden behind the grille, slammed the accelerator to the floor, and sped toward the residential street. Vanguard Holdings paid them exceptionally well to ensure their assets remained secure, and they operated with ruthless efficiency. Back on the porch, the locksmith twisted the screwdriver, forcing the shattered deadbolt to retract. The heavy front door clicked and swung open slightly, revealing the dark, pristine, and entirely empty interior of the condo. Chad grinned, clapping the technician on the shoulder. He pulled a wad of cash from his wallet, counting out the exorbitant fee while gesturing for Chloe to get out of the SUV. They were inside. They had won. The bitter spinster had failed to keep them out of their brand new home. The moment Chad pushed the door wide open and stepped across the threshold, the silent alarm system escalated to its final stage. He was not walking into a free home provided by his generous in-laws. He was crossing a legal boundary into heavily monitored corporate territory. The locksmith packed his tools, eager to leave the freezing cold, entirely unaware of the storm he had just unleashed. The black security cruiser turned the corner onto the street, its tires gripping the asphalt as it accelerated toward the circular driveway, the armed contractors inside, preparing to intercept an active break-in. I stepped off the jet bridge and into the cabin of the international flight, letting the heavy acoustic curtains absorb the dull roar of the terminal behind me. The flight attendant greeted me by name and guided me toward my private suite in the first-class cabin. I slid my tote bag into the overhead compartment, letting the brass zipper clink softly against the molded plastic, and sank into the leather seat. It was a cocoon of absolute privacy, complete with a closing door and a high-definition screen. The ambient lighting was a soft, icy blue, a sharp contrast to the chaotic reality I had engineered back in that freezing driveway. "Would you care for a welcome beverage before takeoff, miss?" the attendant asked, leaning in with a silver tray. "A glass of the champagne, please," I replied, my voice light. "The coldest you have." She returned seconds later with a crystal flute, the pale liquid bubbling furiously. I wrapped my fingers around the stem, leaning my head back against the headrest. The cabin doors sealed shut with a heavy pressurized thud. The aircraft engines whined, vibrating through the floorboards as the plane pushed back from the gate. That was when the digital onslaught began. My phone, resting face up on my tray table, vibrated violently. The screen illuminated the dim cabin, flashing Chloe's name in bold, frantic letters. I watched the alert pulse for 30 seconds until it bumped to voicemail. Less than a second later, the screen lit up again. This time it was Marcus. My father never called me during the workday unless he needed a financial favor or a scapegoat for one of Chad's disasters. I let it ring. The phone went dark, only to instantly blaze back to life with Brenda's face glaring from the caller ID. I picked up the flute and took a slow, deliberate sip. The champagne was crisp, dry, and tasted entirely of freedom. The notifications began to cascade down my lock screen in a waterfall. 10 missed calls. 15. 25. The phone practically danced across the tray table from the vibrating alerts. I watched the numbers tick upward, a digital scoreboard measuring their terror. 30 missed calls, 40. Every vibrating ring seemed to perfectly echo a moment of their past indifference. I stared at the flashing screen and saw my university graduation day. I had sat in the blistering sun for 4 hours, clutching my business degree, scanning the crowded bleachers for a glimpse of my parents. They had promised to come, but Brenda had texted me 10 minutes before the ceremony to say Chloe was having a minor crisis over a chipped fingernail before a local pageant. They chose a teenage beauty contest over my college commencement. I had walked across that stage to the sound of polite, anonymous applause, utterly alone. I remembered the hollow ache in my chest as I watched other families cheering, taking photographs, and celebrating achievements I had matched or exceeded, yet could not get my own blood relatives to acknowledge. 45 missed calls, 50. I took another sip of champagne, letting the cool liquid wash over my tongue. I remembered the day I closed my first major corporate acquisition. I had been 25, exhausted and incredibly proud of the massive deal I had brokered. I drove to their house to share the news, only to be ambushed at the dining table. Marcus had not congratulated me or asked about the specifics of the tough negotiations. Instead, he had slid a past-due commercial tax bill across the mahogany wood, demanding I pay it immediately because family wealth was meant to be shared. When I had hesitated, questioning the amount, Brenda had called me a selfish, ungrateful child who cared more about a bank balance than her own flesh and blood. I had written the check to buy their silence, learning a brutal, unforgettable lesson about the highly transactional nature of their conditional love. My success only mattered to them when it funded their delusions. 60 missed calls, 65. The aircraft surged forward, pinning me against the leather seat as we accelerated down the runway. The nose lifted and the heavy plane tore itself away from the frozen ground, slicing up through the thick gray winter clouds. The physical sensation of leaving the city, putting vertical miles between myself and their entitlement, was intoxicating. I watched the sprawling suburban grid shrink into a miniature map of gray lines and tiny boxes. Somewhere down there, in one of those microscopic neighborhoods, Chad was discovering the consequences of playing a game he did not understand. The seatbelt sign chimed and blinked off. I reached forward and tapped the touchscreen monitor, purchasing the premium in-flight Wi-Fi package. I wanted a front row seat to the finale. The moment the satellite connection synchronized with my device, the phone erupted. A barrage of text messages, voicemails, and missed call alerts flooded the processor, briefly freezing the screen. Chloe had sent voice notes that were just high-pitched, unintelligible sobbing. Brenda had typed out massive, furious paragraphs demanding to know where I hid the physical keys. Marcus had sent a series of single-word texts, each one angrier than the last, ordering me to answer my phone immediately. I scrolled past them all, my thumb moving rhythmically over the glass. The missed call counter hit 75, 78. Then the screen flashed with an incoming call. Call number 79. It was Chad. I set my empty flute down on the tray table. I smoothed my cashmere sweater, adjusted my posture, and tapped the green accept button. I brought the phone to my ear, remaining absolutely silent, letting the connection establish. Maya! Chad screamed, his voice completely shredded, vibrating with raw panic. I had never heard from him before. He sounded like a man drowning. Sirens wailed in the background of the call, overlapping with harsh shouts of commanding voices. Maya, you have to tell them. There are police here. They have guns. They're saying we're squatters. The sheer desperation in his voice was a sharp pivot from the arrogant man who had tried to physically intimidate me on my father's driveway just 24 hours earlier. I leaned into my seat, holding the phone against my ear. The contrast between us was absolute. I was surrounded by the ambient hum of a luxury aircraft cruising at 30,000 feet, a glass of premium vintage champagne resting beside me. Chad was standing on a freezing porch in a wealthy neighborhood, surrounded by private security contractors and local law enforcement officers. Through the audio connection, the chaos unfolding at the condo painted a vivid picture. I could hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots moving across the hardwood floors of the foyer. Radios crackled with sharp bursts of static dispatchers coordinating with units on the scene. Above all that ambient noise rose the piercing, unmistakable sound of my sister weeping. Chloe was screaming in hyperventilating gasps, begging someone not to touch her husband. Her usual entitled demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by the frantic realization that her status as Marcus and Brenda's favorite daughter offered absolutely no protection against a corporate security breach. "Tell them this is a huge misunderstanding," Chad pleaded, his breath hitching as he spoke. "Tell them you are the owner and you gave us the keys. They have me pinned against the hood of my own car, Maya. The locksmith already left. I was just trying to get the furniture inside before the storm hit. You need to talk to the officer in charge right now and clear this up. Tell them Marcus and Brenda gave us this house for the baby." He was still clinging to the delusion that my parents had the authority to gift away property they did not possess. Even with armed guards surrounding him, Chad believed that invoking the family name would serve as a magical shield against the consequences of his actions. He expected me to fall in line to play the role of the compliant, self-sacrificing sister who would gladly lie to the authorities just to save him from embarrassment. The flight attendant passed by my suite offering a warm smile. I nodded politely to her before directing my attention back to the frantic man on the other end of the line. "I cannot do that, Chad," I replied, my voice steady and perfectly clear over the satellite network. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" He shouted, his panic spiking into raw anger. "You are going to let them arrest me over a family dispute. Stop being a bitter brat and tell these rent-a-cops to stand down. I am your brother-in-law. You owe us this much. We are family." I took a slow breath, letting his misplaced rage wash over me without leaving a single mark. "I do not owe you anything," I said, enunciating every single word so the reality of his situation would finally penetrate his thick skull. "I sold the condo to Vanguard Holdings 3 days ago. The wire transfer cleared and escrow closed yesterday afternoon. I am not the owner anymore. You did not break into my house. You hired a locksmith to drill through a commercial-grade security system on a high-value asset owned by a multinational real estate corporation. You are currently trespassing on heavily monitored corporate property." The silence that stretched across the cellular connection was profound. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the distant roar of the jet engines outside my window and the erratic, heavy breathing of a man whose entire world was collapsing in real time. The gears in his head were finally turning, processing the catastrophic magnitude of what he had just done. He had not just forced entry into a vacant family home. He had committed a felony break-in against a faceless, aggressive corporate entity that employed tactical security teams to protect their investments. Vanguard Holdings does not care about Marcus and Brenda. I continued, driving the final nail into the coffin of his entitlement. They do not care about your pregnant wife, and they certainly do not care about the velvet sofa sitting on their porch. They only care that an unauthorized individual destroyed their property and breached their perimeter. "No," Chad whispered, his voice cracking, completely drained of its former hostility. He shook his heavy head in complete, absolute denial. "No, you are lying. Marcus said he handled the title. Marcus said it was ours. You are bluffing to scare me. I am sitting in a first-class cabin flying to the Maldives on a one-way ticket," I replied, staring out the window at the vast expanse of clouds below. "I am drinking champagne paid for by the massive wire transfer Vanguard sent to my private account. Does that sound like a bluff to you?" There was a sharp, sudden clatter as the phone slipped from his trembling hand and hit the pavement. He did not hang up. He simply dropped the device. Through the open microphone lying on the frozen driveway, the audio feed remained perfectly clear. I heard the heavy metallic rattle of handcuffs being unholstered. I heard the unmistakable click of the ratcheting metal teeth locking tightly into place around a pair of wrists. Chloe shrieked a raw, terrifying sound, screaming for her mother, begging the officers to let her husband go. Then a deep, authoritative voice cut through the winter air, addressing Chad directly. "You have the right to remain silent," the police officer stated, his tone flat and uncompromising. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. You are being placed under arrest for felony destruction of private property and criminal trespassing. I reached out with one finger and tapped the red button on my screen, severing the connection and plunging my suite back into peaceful, luxurious silence. The tranquility of the first-class cabin wrapped around me like a heavy silk blanket. I rested my head against the leather seat, watching the flight tracker map on my monitor display our smooth trajectory over the ocean. The silence lasted exactly 4 minutes. I had just motioned for the flight attendant to refill my glass when my phone illuminated the darkened suite once again. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the profound shift in our power dynamic before dragging my thumb across the glowing green icon. I brought the device to my ear, settling in for the performance. Brenda did not say hello. She did not ask for an explanation. A piercing, hysterical shriek tore through the speaker so loud I actually had to pull the phone an inch away from my face. She was gasping for air, her words tumbling out in a rapid, unstructured torrent of pure, unadulterated outrage. Through the chaotic audio feed, I could vividly paint the disastrous scene unfolding on my former front lawn. The heavy thud of car doors slamming shut echoed through the connection. The sharp, authoritative commands of police officers managing a perimeter cut through the background noise. And above it all, the collective whispering murmur of an affluent suburban neighborhood witnessing the absolute destruction of their spiritual leaders. She screamed that half the church congregation lived on that exact street. She was hyperventilating, painting a horrific picture of their social demise in real time. Deacon Miller was standing at the end of his driveway with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle. Mrs. Higgins from the choir committee was openly recording the entire raid on her smartphone from her front porch. Brenda wailed that Chad was currently being shoved into the back of a marked police cruiser, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, while Chloe sat on the freezing pavement, sobbing hysterically. She demanded to know how I could be so incredibly vindictive. She spat the words into the receiver, her voice breaking under the weight of her shattered ego. She accused me of planning this exact public humiliation just to destroy the flawless reputation she had spent 3 decades meticulously curating. She reminded me of her tireless work organizing the upcoming winter gala, the hundreds of thousands of dollars they were raising for the new community center, and the immaculate holy image they projected to their thousands of loyal parishioners. According to Brenda, I was a deeply broken, spiteful child who had always harbored a toxic jealousy toward Chloe's perfect marriage and traditional family values. I listened to her rant without interrupting, letting her expend her frantic energy. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my freshly poured champagne. The vintage was crisp and incredibly satisfying. I looked out the window at the endless expanse of blue sky, feeling absolutely nothing for the woman screaming on the other end of the line. She was entirely unconcerned about Chad facing serious felony charges. She did not care that her pregnant daughter was sitting on the freezing ground. Her only genuine concern was the fact that the prominent members of her congregation were watching her shiny, perfect family get exposed as common criminals in broad daylight. "You did this on purpose?" Brenda sobbed, her breath hitching as she tried to lower her voice to avoid the eavesdropping neighbors. "You waited until Sunday afternoon. You knew exactly when the street would be packed with people coming home from our service. You set your own flesh and blood up to be treated like violent street thugs. How am I supposed to look these people in the eye on Sunday? How am I supposed to host the charity banquet when the entire board of directors just watched my son-in-law get read his Miranda rights on your front lawn? You are a sick, twisted girl. You are the ones who hired a man to drill through a commercial security system," I replied, my voice echoing a cool, unbothered detachment. "I simply sold a piece of real estate. I cannot control what Vanguard Holdings does to secure their corporate assets. You played a stupid game, Brenda. Now you get to explain the rules to your choir committee." A sudden scuffle broke out over the audio feed. I heard Brenda gasp, followed by the sound of the phone fumbling and scraping against fabric. Marcus had violently snatched the device from her hands. When he spoke, he completely bypassed his usual smooth, charismatic pastoral tone. He used his chest, projecting the deep, booming authoritarian roar he usually reserved for demanding total submission from his congregation. He wanted to dominate the airspace, attempting to command reality to bend to his iron will. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat!" Marcus snarled, his voice vibrating with a dark, barely contained fury. "I am putting a stop to this circus right now. I have the chief of police on speed dial, and I'm calling him the second I get off this phone. You are going to contact this security firm and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. You are going to drop these ridiculous trespassing charges, and you are going to wire Chad the bail money for the humiliation you just caused him." I remained perfectly silent, letting his demands hang in the empty space between us. My absolute lack of response infuriated him further. He took a heavy breath, exhaling sharply into the microphone. "You think you are so smart with these fake corporate buyout stories?" he barked, his confidence swelling as he prepared to deliver his final crushing blow. "You think you can just lock us out of a property that belongs to this family? You are completely out of your depth. I hold the executed paperwork. I have a legally binding deed to that condo, signed and notarized. We used it to secure the commercial line of credit for the church expansion. We are the rightful stakeholders of that property, and we are suing you for systemic fraud." I let a low, genuine laugh escape my throat. It was not a chuckle of defense. It was a bright musical sound of absolute victory. He had just handed me the very weapon I needed, confessing to his financial crimes on a recorded line while standing in the middle of an active crime scene. The sheer blinding arrogance required to threaten me with a forged document while surrounded by law enforcement officers was truly staggering. He actually believed his counterfeit paperwork held power over $1 billion holding company. "Really? Dad?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold, venomous amusement. "You have a deed. That is fantastic news. You should definitely show that deed to the police officers arresting Chad. In fact, you should show it to the Vanguard Holdings corporate attorneys when they audit your fraudulent commercial loan tomorrow morning. Show the police that deed, Dad. Let us see how that works out for you." Marcus did not hesitate. Blinded by absolute authority within his loyal congregation, he truly believed his sheer willpower could override the law. He shoved the phone into his coat pocket and marched straight toward the commanding officer. The tactical team had just finished securing Chad in the back of the cruiser. Brenda trailed behind her husband, demanding that the officers respect their pastoral status. Marcus reached into his leather briefcase and produced a thick, embossed folder. He brandished the documents, thrusting them directly into the chest of a bewildered police sergeant. He loudly declared the arrest was an illegal mistake. The sergeant stepped back, eyeing the aggressive pastor with a mixture of annoyance and professional caution. He took the folder, flipping open the cover to examine the heavily stamped pages inside. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest in a posture of total triumph. He lectured the surrounding officers about the sanctity of family property and the legal superiority of his physical deed. Chloe had stopped her hysterical sobbing, watching her father take control with eager anticipation. She firmly believed her father was about to completely secure her luxury home and force the police to apologize to her arrested husband. The sergeant pulled a handheld radio from his tactical vest and keyed the microphone. He requested a priority check on the property address and the names listed on the supposed deed. The dispatcher confirmed receipt of the request, leaving the frozen driveway in an uneasy, tense silence. Marcus tapped his expensive leather loafers on the frosted asphalt, radiating smug impatience. He was so accustomed to his congregation taking his word as gospel that the concept of independent verification completely eluded him. He had drafted that paperwork himself, relying on a cheap online template and a notary who asked zero questions. The radio on the sergeant's shoulder crackled to life, breaking the quiet of the suburban street. The dispatcher's voice was crisp, metallic, and entirely devoid of emotion. The county database showed zero record of any transfer of ownership to Marcus or his church. The property had been legally cleared, assessed, and transferred to Vanguard Holdings 3 days prior. The physical document Marcus was holding was legally non-existent. The sergeant's eyes narrowed as he looked down at the embossed paper in his hands, tracing the suspiciously perfect forged signatures. The smug smile instantly vanished from my father's deeply shocked, arrogant face. "You are presenting this document as a legally binding deed?" the sergeant asked, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a dangerous edge. Marcus hesitated for the very first time, his absolute certainty cracking under intense police scrutiny. He stammered, attempting to explain that the paperwork was an internal family agreement, a private transfer meant to secure a commercial loan for his church expansion. The sergeant cut him off mid-sentence, pulling a secondary device from his duty belt to scan the barcode Marcus had foolishly printed on the bottom margin. The scanner registered an immediate error linking to a residential lease. "This is a crude forgery," the sergeant stated loudly, his voice echoing across the silent neighborhood. "You just handed a fraudulent legal document to a sworn officer during an active felony investigation." Brenda let out a sharp, genuine gasp, stumbling backward as if she had been physically struck. Chloe stared at her father in absolute horror, the realization dawning on her that her savior was digging his own grave. Marcus raised his hands desperately, trying to salvage his immaculate reputation. He argued it was a simple clerical error, but his lies were collapsing under the weight of basic legal scrutiny. The sergeant signaled to two other officers standing near the perimeter. They moved in swiftly, flanking Marcus on both sides. The commanding officer informed my father that presenting a forged real estate document to law enforcement was a severe criminal offense. He stated that Marcus was now officially under investigation for felony fraud and obstruction of justice. The officers ordered him to remain exactly where he was while they contacted the district attorney. Chad, watching the exchange through the reinforced glass of the cruiser, buried his face in his hands. His last desperate hope had become a prime suspect immediately. Brenda's fragile composure completely shattered. She began to hyperventilate, clutching her designer coat against the biting wind. Her perfect suburban life, built on decades of manipulation and pristine social standing, was burning to the ground in front of her most important parishioners. Deacon Miller was still watching from his driveway, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Brenda turned her frantic gaze toward Chloe, who was backing away from her parents as if they were suddenly contagious. The unified front they had always used to bully me into submission was fracturing before the entire neighborhood, completely destroying their spotless, holy reputation. Just as the police sergeant was requesting a detective unit, a sleek black corporate SUV pulled past the barricade and parked on the curb. 3 people stepped out dressed in sharp, immaculate charcoal suits. They moved with a synchronized efficiency that commanded the absolute attention of every officer on the scene. The lead attorney, a tall woman holding a leather portfolio, walked directly toward the ruined front door of the condo. She ignored the crying women and the frantic pastor. She stopped at the threshold, examining the shattered biometric lock and the deep gouges carved heavily into the steel doorframe. The attorney turned around, her expression colder than the freezing pavement beneath her heels. She approached the police sergeant, introducing herself as the Senior Asset Protection Counsel for Vanguard Holdings. She handed him a pristine, legally verified packet of ownership documents. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Chad, sitting in the back of the cruiser, and then shifted her gaze to Marcus. She announced that Vanguard Holdings was pressing maximum felony charges against the intruder for commercial property destruction. Furthermore, she stated they would be filing an immediate civil lawsuit against Marcus for actively claiming their valuable corporate assets. The sharp command from the Vanguard Holdings attorney acted like a starting pistol for the heavily armed corporate security team. They did not wait for the police to clear the perimeter or for my father to finish stuttering his weak, legally baseless defenses. 2 massive contractors in tactical gear bypassed the shivering group on the porch and marched directly through the shattered front door of the condo. They operated with a cold, mechanical efficiency that completely disregarded the delicate nature of the items stacked in the foyer. The bespoke, cream-colored velvet sofa that Chloe had spent 3 months selecting was the first casualty. A contractor grabbed it by the plush armrest, dragging it mercilessly across the rough threshold. The brass legs scraped against the concrete, screeching loudly before the entire piece was shoved unceremoniously off the porch and into a snowdrift on the curb. My sister unleashed a guttural, ear-piercing shriek that echoed off the brick facades of the surrounding luxury homes. She lunged forward, her arms flailing desperately, trying to protect her imported Italian marble side tables as another security guard carried them out by their fragile bases. The guard ignored her completely, treating the expensive decor like contaminated waste meant for a dumpster. He tossed the tables onto the frozen grass, the marble tops cracking instantly upon impact with the hard, icy ground. Chloe fell to her knees in the slush, screaming at the men to stop ruining her life. When her commands failed to halt the corporate eviction, she spun around and directed her frantic fury squarely at our mother. Brenda stood paralyzed on the edge of the driveway, her designer boots sinking into the gray, salted slush. Chloe grabbed the lapels of Brenda's expensive cashmere coat, violently shaking her while demanding that she open her checkbook and make this nightmare disappear. Chloe wailed that she was pregnant, freezing and utterly humiliated in front of the entire congregation. She ordered Brenda to pay off the lawyer's bribe, the police, or buy back the condo right that very second. It was the exact same tantrum strategy my sister had utilized since she was a toddler, fully expecting her mother to magically erase any consequence with a massive infusion of cash. The demand struck Brenda with the force of a physical blow, triggering a sudden, horrifying realization of her own financial ruin. She frantically unzipped her leather handbag, her manicured fingers trembling as she fumbled for a platinum credit card she knew was entirely useless. Brenda had spent the last 3 months aggressively liquidating their cash reserves to fund the illusion of their immaculate, affluent lifestyle. The extravagant Christmas gala she had hosted for the church board had completely drained their primary savings account. The massive down payments she had secretly gifted Chad to maintain his facade of professional success had wiped out their emergency funds. She had absolutely nothing left to give. The golden child, the perfect daughter, who had been groomed to elevate their social standing, was now officially homeless and sobbing in a snowbank. Her supposedly brilliant, successful son-in-law was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, facing a litany of felony charges. Her husband, the esteemed pastor, was stammering under the harsh interrogation of a police detective investigating a crude real estate forgery. Brenda stared at her empty wallet, her breath turning to white vapor in the frigid air, suddenly grasping that the protective bubble of their entitlement had completely burst. She could not buy her way out of a federal corporate lawsuit, and she could not shelter Chloe from the brutal reality of the freezing winter pavement. Vanguard's security team continued their relentless purge of the property. Custom-upholstered dining chairs flew through the air, landing in a chaotic, tangled heap on the curb. Expensive silk draperies, still wrapped in their dry-cleaning plastic, were tossed carelessly into the muddy gutter. A massive gilded mirror shattered spectacularly against the frozen concrete driveway, sending thousands of glittering shards scattering across the property line. The physical manifestation of Chloe's dream life was being unceremoniously converted into roadside garbage. Deacon Miller and the rest of the neighborhood spectators watched in stunned silence, their smartphone cameras capturing every humiliating second of the Addams family's absolute destruction. High above the Atlantic Ocean, the ambient lighting in my private suite shifted to a warm golden hue, simulating a peaceful sunrise. I leaned back against the plush leather seat, enjoying the perfect climate control of the first-class cabin, while my family froze in the bitter suburban winter. The Wi-Fi router on the aircraft hummed quietly, maintaining a flawless connection, as my phone suddenly began to vibrate with a fresh wave of digital vitriol. Chloe had apparently stopped screaming at the security guards long enough to direct her toxic venom toward the only person she could blame for her own disastrous choices. The text messages flooded my screen in rapid, unhinged bursts. She called me a monster, a jealous sociopath, and a bitter spinster who wanted to murder her unborn child by throwing her out into the snow. She swore she was going to drag my name through the mud, go to the local news stations, and completely destroy my professional reputation. She typed in all capital letters, threatening to sue me for everything I owned, and demanding I transfer $1 million to her account immediately to compensate for the emotional distress. I read every single hateful word with absolute unwavering tranquility. I did not feel a solitary ounce of guilt, pity, or remorse. I set my empty champagne flute down on the polished wooden tray table and uncrossed my legs. I opened the messaging application, my fingers hovering over the glowing digital keyboard. I did not type an apology. I did not try to explain the intricacies of corporate real estate transfers or the severe legal consequences of forging property deeds. I did not engage with her frantic, venomous threats. Instead, I opened my secure cloud drive and selected a highly specific, legally binding document. It was not a deed, a lease, or a settlement offer. I attached the encrypted file to the message thread, ensuring the upload was completely verified before pressing the send icon. The digital progress bar filled instantly, launching the ultimate reality check directly to her freezing smartphone. I sent Chloe a pristine, high-resolution PDF copy of the massive commercial tax lien Marcus had secretly taken out against his own church to cover Chad's previous bankruptcy. The read receipt on my messaging app updated immediately, followed by 3 typing dots that danced across the screen for exactly 4 seconds before disappearing completely. Silence descended on the digital thread. Chloe had spent her entire life shielded from consequence, operating under the delusion that Daddy's money and influence were infinite resources. The PDF I sent shattered that deeply ingrained illusion with brutal, unyielding bureaucratic precision. The document was a certified notice of default from the commercial bank. When Vanguard Holdings officially recorded their legitimate corporate deed with the county clerk's office, the automated underwriting system at the bank flagged the fraudulent collateral Marcus had originally pledged. The bank immediately issued a catastrophic penalty notice. Because the luxury condo used to secure their massive commercial line of credit was legally transferred to an outside entity, the bank triggered a hostile acceleration clause. They demanded full, immediate repayment of the entire massive loan balance within exactly 3 days, explicitly citing fraudulent misrepresentation of assets and breach of contract. I could practically envision the color draining from Chloe's face as she stared at the glowing screen of her smartphone, the icy wind whipping her hair across her cheeks. The reality of her beloved father's criminal exposure was meticulously detailed in black and white legal text. Marcus had quietly leveraged his own sanctuary, masking the fraudulent loan as a necessary capital fund for a church expansion project. In reality, there was no expansion. He was secretly patching the massive financial holes left by Chad's undisclosed catastrophic bankruptcy to ensure his golden child never had to suffer the indignity of downgrading her lifestyle. It was a perfectly insulated house of cards that relied entirely on my continued silence, my passive submission, and my willingness to let them steal a property that legally belonged to me. By selling the real estate to Vanguard Holdings, I had pulled the foundational pin out of his massive criminal enterprise. Now my parents were utterly trapped in a completely financial prison with walls closing in at lightning speed. Brenda was standing in the freezing slush with maximum platinum credit cards and a completely drained savings account. She had sacrificed their entire emergency safety net on lavish Christmas parties, imported catering, and bespoke furniture to fiercely maintain their elite suburban illusion. They could not turn to their wealthy congregation or influential board members for a sudden emergency bailout. Requesting a massive financial lifeline from the church board of directors would require an immediate formal financial audit. That audit would instantly expose the fake deed, the forged notary signatures, and the direct illegal funneling of sacred church funds directly into Chad's failing personal pockets. The deacons would not just strip Marcus of his pastoral title, health insurance, and lucrative salary. They would gladly hand him over to federal prosecutors to save the holy tax status. They possessed 0 liquid assets, 0 remaining credit limits, and absolutely no legal high ground to stand on. The Vanguard contractors were still systematically dumping Chloe's unpaid velvet chairs and shattered marble tables onto the curb, forming a literal mountain of garbage that perfectly mirrored my family's current social standing. Chad was securely locked in the back of a marked police cruiser, currently being processed for trespassing, corporate vandalism, and resisting a lawful order. The neighborhood spectators, the very people Brenda had spent 3 decades trying to impress, were recording the entire spectacular downfall from their heated porches, uploading the disgrace to social media. Every single escape route Marcus had cultivated was firmly bolted shut. He could not preach his way out of a commercial bank default. He could not manipulate a massive holding company. He was out of strategic maneuvers, out of victims, and out of time. The aggressive deadline was a ticking time bomb strapped directly to his chest. My luxurious flight continued its smooth, undisturbed trajectory over the pristine white clouds, the rhythmic hum of the jet engines providing a soothing soundtrack to my absolute vindication. I took another slow, deliberate sip of champagne, letting the crisp bubbles wash away any lingering trace of the frightened, obedient girl they had raised me to be. The airplane's satellite connection was flawless, keeping me tethered to the explosive drama unfolding thousands of miles below on a frozen driveway. I knew they were currently standing in the wreckage of their lives, realizing the sheer magnitude of their colossal miscalculation. I did not have to wait long for the final stage of their desperate capitulation. My phone illuminated the dimmed cabin once more, but this time it was not a frantic text message from my hysterical sister. An incoming audio call suddenly flashed across the glowing display, prominently bearing my father's full name. I let it ring. I slowly watched the digital numbers pulse on the bright screen, intentionally allowing the mounting, suffocating terror to fully saturate his desperate mind. I wanted him to stew in the agonizing uncertainty, to feel the exact same helplessness he had inflicted upon me for years before I finally swiped the screen and brought the sleek device to my ear. "Maya, please do not hang up!" Marcus choked out, his voice utterly unrecognizable through the static. Gone was the booming roar of the untouchable spiritual leader. Gone was the arrogant, foolish patriarch who had confidently threatened me with a forged legal document just 20 minutes prior. Instead, the broken man on the other end of the line was violently hyperventilating, his breath hitching with genuine panic. He was weeping openly, the wet, ragged sound of his complete psychological collapse echoing loudly through the receiver. "I know we completely failed you over the years." He sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine as he begged for his life. "But you are my strong, successful daughter. You have always been the incredibly smart one. You are the only person who can fix this. Maya, I am begging you on my hands and knees, please bail us out just one last time." 6 weeks later, the freezing suburban nightmare of my past felt like a distant movie I had turned off halfway through. I sat on the sprawling teak deck of my overwater villa in the Maldives, listening to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the Indian Ocean beneath me. It was New Year Eve. The balmy tropical air smelled of salt and blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the bitter winter storm currently burying my hometown in snow. A massive platter of fresh fruit sat on the glass table beside my lounge chair, untouched. I was wearing a lightweight linen sundress, feeling the warm evening breeze trace across my bare shoulders. In the distance, brilliant bursts of fireworks had already begun illuminating the dark horizon, celebrating the arrival of midnight. The serene tranquility of my island retreat was suddenly interrupted by the sharp metallic chime of an incoming video call on my laptop. I stared at the glowing screen, watching the familiar dreaded names flash across the notification bar. I carefully adjusted the angle of my webcam to ensure the spectacular view of the turquoise water was fully visible in the background and clicked the green accept button. The video feed buffered for a split second before the faces of Marcus and Brenda materialized on my screen. The visual shock of their appearance actually made me pause. They were sitting close together on their outdated living room sofa, completely enveloped in deep shadows. The only light source in their house appeared to be the harsh bluish glow of the computer monitor, illuminating their pale faces. They looked as if they had aged a decade in a matter of weeks. His hair was thinning and shockingly gray at the roots. His cheeks were hollow, and the skin sagged around his jawline, devoid of the robust, arrogant color he always carried as a prominent pastor. Brenda looked even worse. Her expensive designer makeup was entirely gone, revealing dark circles under her bloodshot eyes. She was wrapped tightly in a thick, faded blanket, shivering slightly in the cold, unheated room. The utility company had clearly executed the final shut-off notices they had been desperately dodging. They were living in the freezing dark, surrounded by the crushing weight of their total financial ruin, while I sat comfortably in tropical paradise. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound dry and grating over the laptop speakers. He stared at my bright, sun-drenched background, his eyes darting frantically around the luxurious details of my overwater villa. He swallowed hard, visibly, struggling to suppress his massive pride before speaking. He told me that their situation had become completely unlivable. Vanguard Holdings had aggressively pursued the civil lawsuit, freezing their remaining personal accounts and placing massive liens on the few assets they still possessed. The church board had indeed launched a full forensic audit after the commercial bank default became public knowledge. The deacons had immediately forced Marcus into a humiliating public resignation, stripping him of his pension, his housing allowance, and his entire professional identity. Chad was currently sitting in a county jail cell awaiting trial, completely unable to post bail. Chloe had been forced to move back into the dark, freezing house, sleeping on an air mattress in the basement. My father leaned into the camera, his voice trembling with a pathetic manufactured humility, asking if I could wire a temporary living stipend. I remained completely silent, letting his desperate request hang awkwardly in the tropical air. My refusal to immediately offer salvation shattered the fragile facade of his humility. The desperate pastor instantly vanished, replaced by the demanding authoritarian patriarch I had endured my entire childhood. His face flushed a dark, angry red. He slammed his fist down on an unseen table off camera, causing the video feed to shake violently. He raised his voice, adopting the booming, theatrical cadence of his Sunday sermons. He demanded to know how I could sit there in a luxury resort while my own flesh and blood froze in the dark. He accused me of being heartless, cruel, and entirely devoid of basic family loyalty. Brenda suddenly leaned into the frame, clutching the edges of her blanket, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged intensity. She attempted to play the ultimate trump card they had always used to force my compliance. "We are your parents, Maya." Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with righteous indignation. "We gave you life. We raised you. God commands you to honor us. You cannot just abandon your family when we need you the absolute most." I slowly leaned forward, bringing my face closer to the camera lens. I reminded them of the day I turned 18. I reminded them of the freezing rain outside our house when they packed my few belongings into garbage bags and threw me out the front door because I refused to sign a fraudulent loan for Chloe. I reminded them of the nights I slept in my rusted car in a college parking lot eating stale crackers while they posted photos of their extravagant family vacations to Europe with their golden child. They had loudly proclaimed that kicking me out was tough love, a necessary lesson in building character. They had stood on the porch telling me that true adults do not ask for handouts. They had deliberately engineered my absolute rock bottom, leaving me to starve or survive entirely on my own, proudly calling it character development. They wanted me broken and dependent, but their cruelty had inadvertently forged a titanium armor around my ambition. I had built an empire from the very dirt they threw me into. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but I reached over to the glass table and picked up my drink. I looked directly into the camera, staring straight through the connection into their defeated, hollow eyes. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coconut drink. "I am honoring you," I stated. "I am letting you experience the independence you always forced on me." Marcus stared at the webcam, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish suffocating on dry land. My words hung in the digital space between us, dismantling his lifelong narrative of tough love. He had expected me to fold, to revert to the obedient scapegoat who would desperately seek his validation by opening my checkbook. Instead, he found a woman who had weaponized his cruel philosophy against him. He wiped a trembling hand across his sweaty forehead, attempting to muster a shred of his former pastoral authority. He tried to pivot, arguing that a temporary loan was entirely different from a handout, insisting he would sign whatever legal promissory note I required. He swore he would pay me back with massive interest the second the church board reinstated him and cleared his name. I set my drink back onto the glass table, the condensation dripping onto the polished surface. I explained that a promissory note from a man currently under investigation for felony fraud was entirely worthless to my holding company. I pointed out that he would not be generating any income to repay a loan, let alone supporting his newly homeless golden child. His eyes narrowed in confusion, the desperate panic briefly replaced by a flash of his trademark defensive anger. He demanded to know what I was talking about firmly, insisting the police sergeant had already released him on his own recognizance pending the district attorney's review of the forged deed. He actually believed his legal troubles were contained to a single local jurisdiction and a minor commercial misunderstanding. "You really did not think this through," I stated, my voice echoing a clinical detached precision. "You treated that luxury condo like a personal piggy bank for half a decade. You charged Chad and Chloe premium market rent funneling that cash directly into your personal accounts to fund Brenda's country club memberships and your fleet of luxury vehicles." Marcus stiffened, his defensive posture instantly returning. He loudly declared that what he did with his family's money was none of my business, foolishly reiterating his completely debunked claim that the property rightfully belonged to him. He sneered, stating that undocumented cash exchanges between a father and his son-in-law were standard practice in wealthy families and completely untraceable. "That is exactly where your arrogance blinded you," I replied, leaning into the camera frame to ensure he caught every single syllable. "Vanguard Holdings is not a casual family operation. We are a federally compliant corporate entity. When we officially assumed full control of the property assets, our accounting division conducted a forensic sweep of the condo's financial history. They uncovered the fake commercial lease you generated to secure Chad's line of credit. They also uncovered 5 years of missing rental income that was never deposited into the property management accounts. To protect my corporate officers from being implicated in your financial crimes, our legal team had to take immediate action against you." Brenda let out a soft, terrified whimper, clutching the faded blanket tighter around her trembling shoulders. Marcus swallowed hard, the remaining color draining rapidly from his hollow cheeks. He asked me, his voice barely a whisper, what exactly my legal team had done. I smiled, an empty expression that conveyed absolute finality. I informed them that Vanguard Holdings had filed a retroactive correction with the Internal Revenue Service. We officially reported the hundreds of thousands of dollars in missing rental income, providing the federal government with the exact routing numbers of the personal accounts where Marcus unlawfully deposited the funds. We handed the IRS the fraudulent lease agreement he signed, proving he was actively operating an illegal, untaxed commercial rental business. "The federal government is currently auditing your entire financial history," I announced, watching the sheer magnitude of the devastation wash over his face. "You evaded federal taxes on a massive undocumented income stream for 5 consecutive years. The IRS does not care about your pastoral title, your neighborhood reputation, or your excuses about helping your golden child. They care about tax evasion, wire fraud, and financial penalties. The official notice of audit was sent via certified mail to your primary residence yesterday morning. You are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in immediate back taxes, staggering fines, and the real threat of a lengthy federal prison sentence." Marcus grabbed the edge of his laptop, his knuckles turning completely white. He frantically argued that he could not possibly pay the IRS. He demanded to know how I expected him to survive a federal audit with zero liquid capital. I reminded him, my tone perfectly, even, that he still possessed a few highly valuable assets sitting idle in his driveway. The vintage Mercedes he spent his weekends polishing, the customized Range Rover Brenda used for her shopping sprees, and the collection of expensive watches he wore to command respect at the pulpit. "You will have to liquidate absolutely everything," I stated, simply, coldly, and firmly. "Every luxury car, every piece of designer jewelry, every single asset you own must be sold off immediately just to keep you out of a federal penitentiary. You must officially step down as a pastor, confess your financial crimes to the congregation, and beg the IRS for a payment plan." A horrifying, sharp, and violent gasping sound suddenly erupted loudly through the audio feed. Brenda clutched her chest, her eyes rolling back into her head as the absolute reality of her new, impoverished life struck her like a physical blow. She slumped sideways, completely disappearing from the camera's view, collapsing onto the dark living room floor with a heavy thud. Marcus did not even turn around to look at his unconscious wife. He remained frozen, staring into the webcam with wide, terrified eyes. The arrogant, untouchable spiritual leader was now completely, irrevocably gone. He was calculating the brutal loss of his beloved cars, his sacred public image, and his entire freedom, finally realizing that the daughter he discarded had just orchestrated his inescapable ruin. While my father sat paralyzed in the dark, confronting the impending federal audit, his beloved son-in-law was experiencing his own brutal reality check. Chad spent the final hours of New Year's Eve shivering on a stainless steel bench inside a county holding cell. The ambient noise of intoxicated revelers and hardened criminals echoed off the cinderblock walls, providing a stark contrast to the exclusive country club galas he usually attended. He had confidently assumed his brief incarceration would be a temporary minor inconvenience. He fully expected Marcus to arrive within the hour, flanked by high-priced defense attorneys, and carrying a certified cashier's check to cover his bail. He spent the first few hours casually leaning against the bars, demanding to speak to a supervisor and threatening the processing officers with severe career repercussions. He name-dropped the mayor, the chief of police, and several prominent local judges, entirely convinced his social standing granted him absolute immunity from standard booking procedures. The officers simply ignored him, treating the former Golden Boy like every other trespassing vandal in the intake queue. As the clock struck midnight, the devastating truth finally began to penetrate his thick skull. Nobody was coming to rescue him, and his precious network of influential friends had immediately abandoned him the second the word fraud was attached to his name. His inherent belief that his privilege would function as an impenetrable shield dissolved entirely upon his first interaction with the legal system. He quickly discovered that local connections meant absolutely nothing against the relentless, highly compensated legal division of Vanguard Holdings. The multi-billion-dollar real estate corporation treated Chad's unauthorized occupation and subsequent vandalism of their newly acquired asset as a hostile corporate attack. They did not dispatch a weary public defender to handle the preliminary hearings. They sent a team of ruthless corporate litigators who systematically dismantled Chad's feeble defense. They presented the presiding judge with high-definition security footage of Chad aggressively resisting the private contractors alongside a comprehensive damage assessment regarding the bespoke furniture and imported fixtures destroyed during his eviction. The judge, facing a mountain of undeniable evidence provided by a massive federal entity, refused to grant leniency. The bail was set at a staggering $50,000. Without Marcus's fraudulent safety net to absorb the cost, the sum might as well have been $50 million. Chad was officially trapped in the county lockup, entirely stripped of his tailored suits, his arrogant smirk, and his perceived invincibility, realizing for the first time that his actions carried permanent severe consequences. The fallout of Chad's prolonged incarceration hit my sister with the force of a freight train. Chloe was unceremoniously forced to haul her few surviving designer suitcases into the unfinished basement of our parents' freezing home. It was the exact same damp concrete space that Chad had previously offered me as a mocking, humiliating alternative to the luxury condo they had tried to steal. The bitter irony of her current living situation was a poetic masterpiece. The basement lacked proper heating, and the exposed fiberglass insulation scratched against her skin as she inflated a cheap plastic air mattress on the cold cement floor. The utilities remained shut off due to Marcus's massive outstanding balance, leaving her to navigate the subterranean darkness, using only the fading flashlight on her smartphone. She was surrounded by boxes of old church decorations and discarded junk, a stark physical representation of her plummeting social worth. She spent her days wrapped in layers of old winter coats, staring blankly at the exposed floor joists above her head, desperately trying to comprehend how her perfectly curated life had evaporated into thin air while the icy winter draft seeped through the cracked foundation. The immense pressure of total financial ruin violently fractured the foundation of her marriage. During their strictly monitored 15-minute jailhouse phone calls, the loving facade completely disintegrated. Chad furiously blamed Chloe's family for his incarceration, screaming through the static that Marcus had set him up with the fraudulent deed. He accused his father-in-law of intentionally dragging him down to protect his own pastoral reputation. Chloe aggressively fired back, shrieking that Chad was supposed to be a brilliant financial provider, not a fraudulent squatter who could not even afford his own bail. The toxic arguments escalated rapidly, exposing the shallow reality of their relationship. Their marriage had never been built on mutual respect or genuine affection. It was a fragile partnership constructed entirely on a foundation of stolen money, mutual entitlement, and a shared obsession with projecting an illusion of elite success. With the luxury cars impounded, the bank accounts frozen, and the designer wardrobes scattered in a snowy gutter, they had absolutely nothing left to hold them together. The golden couple was now reduced to two desperate strangers, viciously tearing each other apart over a recorded prison phone line, their fairy tale ending in a symphony of mutual accusations. My phone vibrated softly against the glass table of my villa, pulling my attention away from the mesmerizing ocean waves. The notification indicated a fresh audio message had arrived through a secondary encrypted messaging application. I tapped the screen, expecting another barrage of empty threats, or perhaps a panicked legal update from Vanguard Holdings. Instead, the audio file began playing a sound I had not heard in over 2 decades. It was the sound of my sister experiencing genuine, unfiltered despair. Chloe's voice was completely stripped of her trademark arrogance, replaced by wet, ragged, gasping sobs that distorted the microphone. She was hyperventilating, the words tumbling out in a frantic, uncoordinated rush. She confessed that Chad's public defender was completely useless, and Vanguard's corporate lawyers were actively pushing for maximum sentencing to make a public example out of him. She admitted she was freezing, terrified, and entirely out of options. She wept into the phone, her pride completely shattered, begging her estranged, formerly invisible sister for a lifeline. She pleaded through the digital static, desperately asking me to transfer just $5,000 so she could secure a basic criminal defense attorney to keep her husband out of a state penitentiary. The audio message ended with a sharp, abrupt digital click, instantly severing the connection to her pathetic, tear-soaked begging. I lowered the smartphone from my ear, letting the frantic echoes of her desperation fade into the ambient rhythm of the gentle Indian Ocean waves. I stood up from my teak lounge chair, my bare feet sinking into the pristine, powdery white sand of my private island beach. The tropical sun was just beginning to rise on New Year's Day, painting the vast Maldivian horizon in brilliant strokes of tangerine and gold. It was a breathtaking cinematic display of absolute tranquility. I closed my eyes, tilting my face upward to catch the morning warmth, waiting for the familiar, deeply ingrained conditioning of suburban familial guilt to wash over me. I waited for that old heavy knot of obligation to form in my chest, the specific psychological trigger Marcus and Brenda had expertly installed to ensure my endless financial and emotional compliance. I stood completely still on the edge of the turquoise water, actively searching my soul for a single shred of sympathy, pity, or remorse for the miserable woman sobbing in a freezing dark basement halfway across the world. I found absolutely nothing. The profound emptiness within me was not a symptom of cruelty, but rather the ultimate manifestation of total liberation. Chloe was begging for a meager $5,000. To the chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, that specific sum was practically pocket change, a rounding error in a daily corporate expense report. I could easily wire the funds to her freezing smartphone with 3 simple swipes of my thumb, instantly securing a mediocre defense attorney for her criminal husband. I could instantly alleviate her subterranean nightmare, restoring a tiny fraction of the golden privilege she had blindly enjoyed her entire life. But doing so would permanently validate their decades of horrific abuse. It would prove that their strategy of treating me like disposable human garbage was ultimately effective, rewarding their relentless toxicity with unearned salvation. They had spent my entire existence violently pushing me to the absolute margins of their perfect family narrative, openly demanding that I accept my role as the invisible financial sponsor. Now, standing on the precipice of a new year, I was finally embracing the exact narrative they had written for me. They had relentlessly preached the gospel of rugged independence whenever I was the one starving, freezing, or facing absolute ruin. When my college tuition came due, they told me to build character. When I needed a simple cosigner for my very first tiny studio apartment, they claimed that providing assistance would stunt my personal growth. Every single desperate plea for basic parental support I had ever uttered was met with callous lectures about self-reliance and the harsh realities of the adult world. It was a spectacular, breathtaking display of pure hypocrisy. Marcus, Brenda, and Chloe had happily cannibalized my financial stability for years, secretly feeding off my success to fund their ridiculous country club illusion while publicly mocking my work ethic. They had weaponized the sacred concept of blood loyalty, twisting it into a mandatory extortion racket. But the unyielding truth of the universe is that you cannot demand fierce loyalty from the very same daughter you spent 30 years actively trying to destroy. The devastating winter storm currently burying them in their unpaid suburban mansion was entirely of their own making. I was merely refusing to act as their human snowplow. A flock of white seabirds skimmed low across the crystalline water, their calls breaking the tropical silence as I finally looked back down at my glowing screen. I unlocked the device, the facial recognition software responding instantly to my calm, unbothered expression. I bypassed my secure corporate banking portal and tapped the brightly colored icon for a common consumer payment application. I navigated to the search bar and slowly typed in my sister's familiar username. Her profile picture immediately populated the screen. It was a heavily filtered, professionally edited photograph taken during a luxury yacht excursion in the Mediterranean last summer, a trip entirely funded by Marcus, funneling my stolen real estate equity directly into her checking account. She was wearing designer sunglasses and holding a crystal champagne flute, her head thrown back in an arrogant, carefree laugh. The sheer entitlement radiating from the digital image was physically repulsive. I stared at her smiling, perfectly curated face, vividly recalling the exact tone of disgust in her voice when she demanded I surrender my luxury condominium to cover her husband's secret bankruptcy. I tapped her profile, initiating a new financial transfer. The application prompted me to enter a specific numerical amount. I did not type the $5,000 she had desperately requested through her hysterical weeping audio message. I did not enter $500 or even $50. I tapped the digital keypad with slow, deliberate precision. 0.01. I authorized a direct, instantaneous electronic transfer of exactly one single penny. The application immediately advanced to the required memo field, asking me to provide a brief description for the transaction. I did not write a lengthy explanation regarding my years of suffering. I did not waste my time outlining the severe legal peril they were currently facing with the Internal Revenue Service or the catastrophic consequences of their impending federal audits. I did not offer any unsolicited legal advice regarding Chad's upcoming felony arraignment. I kept my final correspondence flawlessly concise, matching the exact level of emotional investment they had shown me my entire life. I typed my message, the digital keyboard clicking softly against the crashing ocean waves. The note attached to the transfer simply read, "For the memories. Happy New Year." I firmly pressed the bright blue send button, watching the animated confirmation screen verify that the solitary copper coin had successfully landed in her account. I then hit block on Chloe, Marcus, Brenda, and Chad. My beautiful, completely unburdened new life had officially finally begun. The digital silence that followed the execution of those 4 block commands was the most beautiful sound I had ever experienced. It was not merely the absence of incoming notifications, it was the absolute cessation of a lifelong psychological war. I lowered my phone and let my gaze drift back to the endless expanse of the Indian Ocean. The sun was fully cresting the horizon now, washing the Maldivian sky in brilliant shades of violet and crushed gold. The gentle rhythmic lapping of the crystal-clear water against the powdery white shoreline synchronized with my own steady heartbeat. For 30 years, my internal metronome had been calibrated to the erratic, demanding tempo of my family's constant crises. Every missed call used to trigger a spike of adrenaline, every urgent text a prelude to another financial extortion disguised as a familial emergency. Now standing alone on this remote, pristine beach, my pulse was entirely my own. I inhaled the warm, salt-laced tropical air, feeling a physical weight lift from my shoulders, a heavy, invisible yoke I had carried since childhood, completely dissolving into the ocean breeze. I walked back to my shaded teak lounge chair and picked up my tablet, opening the encrypted dashboard that housed my personal and corporate financial portfolios. Vanguard Holdings was operating with flawless, terrifying efficiency. The numbers glowing on the high-definition screen represented a level of wealth that Marcus and Brenda could not even fathom in their wildest, most delusional country club fantasies. My offshore accounts were fortified, my real estate assets were rapidly appreciating, and my diverse investment divisions were projecting record-breaking quarterly yields. I scrolled through the corporate summaries, noting the official foreclosure proceedings initiating on the luxury condo and the swift, merciless legal actions moving forward against Chad. My success was no longer a secret piggy bank for them to raid. It was an impenetrable fortress of my own design, built brick by brick through relentless labor while they were busy playing dress-up with stolen funds. My financial empire was completely secure, and my heavy family burden was finally irrevocably severed. Staring at the staggering balance in my primary checking account, I allowed myself a moment of profound analytical reflection on the exact mechanics of their abuse. For my entire life, Marcus and Brenda had conveniently weaponized the trope of the strong black woman to justify their blatant neglect. Whenever I was exhausted, frightened, or in desperate need of basic parental guidance, they would quickly label me as independent, resilient, and fiercely capable. It was an insidious, highly effective psychological manipulation. By constantly praising my supposed inherent strength, they completely absolved themselves of any obligation to actually parent me. They used my forced self-reliance as a convenient, socially acceptable excuse to funnel every ounce of their emotional warmth and financial resources directly toward Chloe. They demanded I carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, without ever offering me a place to rest, firmly believing that my capacity to endure their toxicity was infinite. They never realized that by forcing me to survive entirely on my own, they were actively forging the very weapon that would eventually dismantle their entire fraudulent existence. They demanded I be resilient, so I became utterly unbreakable. They demanded I be independent, so I learned how to amass massive corporate power without relying on a single soul. They stripped away my safety net, forcing me to build an empire out of sheer survival instinct. The caricature they used to chain me to a life of silent servitude was the exact same armor I wore to legally and financially annihilate them. I had taken the independence they forced upon me and sharpened it into a lethal corporate blade. I was no longer the designated family scapegoat, the quiet financial sponsor, or the obedient invisible daughter waiting desperately for a scrap of validation. I was the undisputed master of my own life, holding absolute dominion over my future. I locked the tablet and set it aside, letting the screen fade to black. The tropical sun was climbing higher, the heat baking into the white sand and warming my skin. I walked slowly along the water's edge, letting the gentle tide wash over my bare feet. The sheer magnitude of my new reality was intoxicating. There would be no more anxious holidays spent dodging Marcus's condescending financial inquiries. There would be no more emergency wire transfers to cover Chad's pathetic business failures. There would be no more enduring Brenda's passive-aggressive insults about my wardrobe or my lifestyle choices. I had successfully excised the cancer from my life, leaving behind a clean, pristine space ready to be filled entirely with my own ambitions and desires. The profound peace I felt was absolute and unwavering. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for the federal audit consuming my parents, nor did I feel any sorrow for the county jail cell currently holding my brother-in-law. They were simply experiencing the natural, unavoidable consequences of their own spectacular arrogance. A soft crunching of sand behind me broke the morning stillness. I turned slowly, my posture relaxed and unbothered. A tall, incredibly handsome man was walking down the shoreline from the neighboring private villa. He had striking, intelligent eyes, a warm, genuine smile, and the effortless, confident stride of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He stopped a respectful distance away, gesturing toward the breathtaking view of the endless turquoise ocean spread out before us. He introduced himself with a polite, engaging tone, mentioning he had just arrived at the resort the previous evening. He asked if I knew the best spots on the island for snorkeling, his gaze lingering on my face with clear, respectful interest. He then paused, tilting his head slightly, as he took in the quiet, solitary setup of my lounge chair and my single iced coffee. He asked, his voice gentle and curious, if I was traveling alone. I looked back out at the horizon, the brilliant morning sun reflecting off the water, and felt a genuine, radiant smile spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of anxiety, obligation, or hidden pain. I turned back to the handsome stranger, meeting his gaze with absolute, unshakable confidence. "Yes," I stated, my voice ringing clear and steady over the sound of the crashing waves. "For the first time in my life, I am completely free."